Conflict, chaos and control. The 3 C's. Landmines we all navigate throughout our lives. They're unavoidable. Let's get right into it. No arguments. Today we're looking at conflict. How to understand your personality pain points, as well as looking at the different ways we can negotiate with others to achieve the best outcomes for all concerned. First up, as I've spoken about in previous podcasts, let me remind you about our unique perception of everything. We all view the world through a different lens. No one sees it quite like you do. One of the most common breeding grounds of conflict are our everyday conversations, even the simplest ones. For that very reason, we see the other person's view through very different eyes. I'm Kate Mason, and welcome to Personalities, Parenting and Partners. This is the podcast that connects you to the ones you care about the most. Now, I care about my son Jack, and a few minutes ago I was in conversation with him and his girlfriend Ari. I was telling him of my newfound friends in Canada and how cold it was over there. Over here in Australia we're heading for 38 degrees Celsius and they were sitting in minus 40 degrees Celsius. Jack questioned whether they really used Celsius or Fahrenheit. Ari and I both insisted yes, it was Celsius. He said, I'm going to look that up. Where in Canada are they? He Googled madly. I felt really annoyed, and so did Ari. We angrily rolled our eyes at each other, and I said to him, I can't believe you don't believe us. He found his answer. Yes, it is minus 40 degrees Celsius, he said. Irritated by this response, I said to him, we told you they used Celsius. We were ready for an apology and to be told we were right. Oh, I believe that, he said. I just didn't believe it was that cold. So Ari and I were on a totally different page. We assumed he disbelieved us about the difference of temperature measurement, Fahrenheit, Celsius, whereas he was looking at the temperature. A small detail, but it created negative emotions. We then had the conversation about how easy it is to misunderstand someone's conversation over such a small matter, and how quickly it can lead to disagreements and tension. Although I must admit, I was still annoyed my truth was questioned, even though I am known to elaborate my storytelling. So what does this tell us? Well, to keep talking to each other and discussing your understanding or misunderstanding of conversations. That way you can prevent conflict before it begins. Now that we've set the table, so to speak, we can really pull back the curtain and see what it's all about. In this episode of Personalities, Parenting and Partners, we'll be talking about the importance of awareness of personality type differences and how to try to avoid the conflict that can escalate and create rifts in relationships. Conflict's part of life, no matter how hard we try to avoid it or welcome it with open arms. Conflict is present in relationships, workplaces, friendships, and families. Do you know how to handle your negative emotional triggers and what sets them off? Do you know how to respond appropriately to other people's anger and frustration? How can we de-escalate conflict and understand other people's personalities? The answers to those questions can save relationships. In fact, they can strengthen relationships. Let's talk about the importance of understanding type when dealing with conflict and conflict resolution. With all preferences, there's possible discord that might come from each set for many reasons. So let's look at some of these. Remembering, as always, we can all use both preferences. However, one will feel more natural than the other. Let's start with extroversion-introversion. Where do you get your energy? Are you energized by spending time in the outer world of people and things, or by spending time in your inner world of ideas and images? We've talked about these two types in previous episodes of Personality, Parenting and Partners. If you missed it, I encourage you to download that episode as well. Now, the introvert doesn't always want to show their emotions to the outer world, and sometimes they don't get the chance to speak up when upset or angry. This can often lead to a build-up of internal emotion that explodes, often at an inappropriate time, as it's been simmering under the surface for so long. My husband and I attended a party, and I assumed we both had a great time. However, it wasn't until 3 days later, when in a bad mood, he then told me how angry he was about an incident that happened the night of the party. I was dumbfounded, and angry too. If this was so important, why didn't he speak of it immediately? We could have cleared it up days before, and he'd been sitting on it fuming internally. I've related this story to other extroverts who are also often caught out in this manner. An introvert can dwell on their problems internally for so long that when they let it out, it's like an explosion. This is stressful for them and the other person, and it happens a lot. Think of the many times you've seen or experienced this very situation. Okay? Tip: introverts, please talk about problems as soon as they occur. The extrovert's more likely to express their emotions, both good and bad, in a loud, more dramatic way. This can be overwhelming for the introvert, who might want to think of their response and may feel threatened by the noise and drama. Their conversation is often not thought out at all, so sometimes they might regret what they've said afterwards. Tip for extroverts: always think more before you speak. You may unintentionally anger and hurt people with careless words. Let's look at sensing and intuition. These preferences refer to our different outlooks on the world. Sensing people see the details, intuitives see the big picture. The intuitives' need to express their big picture ideas and thoughts can make sensing types feel overwhelmed and angry. They often can't see the sense in the intuitives' ideas and look at these ideas as quirky and unattainable, and they may dismiss them as a waste of time. The sensing type's need for specific details and information, and their lack of vision and desire for change, can cause great frustration and annoyance for the intuitive. And intuitives are often upset when their ideas and thoughts are unrecognized and undervalued by sensing types. I've worked with many companies where the intuitives are in the minority, and the tension between the sensing and intuitive preference types, the way they view the world, is an obstacle to the progress of the business. The intuitives are usually driving a desire for change and innovation, and the sensing types are digging their heels in. After all, why fix what isn't broken? Once these differences are understood and discussed, the anger and frustration of all parties is usually diffused, and a deeper understanding and cooperation among staff is the result. According to MBTI research, these last two preferences of the MBTI to follow often cause the greatest discord. Let's take a look at our decision-making processes. Thinking and feeling. The thinking and feeling personality preferences often look at where the individual directs their thinking process when solving conflict. Thinkers are more likely to look at the facts of the situation as well as the opinions and principles of the people involved in the conflict, whereas feelers tend to focus on the interpersonal dynamics of the situation and the needs and emotions of the people involved. These different styles of approaching conflict can lead to additional tension between thinkers and feelers who are already often in disagreement. Another area of conflict common amongst this type is the inability and the lack of knowledge about how to deal with each other's emotional needs and language. The thinker's logical, questioning, critiquing way of thinking, asking questions and manner, can make the feeling type feel as though they're being interrogated and are not good enough, and their reaction to this can be one of feeling sad, upset, and unwanted. On the other hand, the thinkers can feel overwhelmed and angry when the feeling type uses their emotive language to discuss problems or issues that might arise. A friend of mine came to me. She was going to resign from her job. She told me that the people she worked with were unkind, mean, and did not like her. We worked out her type and discovered she's a feeling type who rarely uses her thinking preference. I sent her back to work, and I said to her, listen to their language. Was it mean and unkind, or logical and critiquing? She came back the following week and said, I'm working with a team of thinking types. Excellent. Now she can work on the conflict that was occurring herself. She now understands how the opposite type works. Knowledge is power. It is. So use it. She learnt how to talk in a more thinking style that made her fellow workers feel comfortable. Now she wasn't overwhelming them with emotional conversations and questions. She knew that they were not unkind, just logical, and once aware of this, she was able to enjoy her workplace. She was promoted later that year and still uses her knowledge of the MBTI today, using it to negotiate conflict and build great relationships. How's that for a happy ending? Our last preference is judging and perception. The differences in organisation and flexibility and getting the job done. This can create great frustration in the expectation of outcomes. The judging and perceiving elements of personality help to determine how an individual makes decisions about the conflict. People who use the judging preference tend to want to get things decided so that they can get on with their structured life. When problems and conflicts arise, they'll usually assess what's going on, decide what to do, and act on the decision. They'll usually want to stick to the plan until it's carried to fruition, rather than reopening and reworking the issue. On the other hand, perceivers focus on the input of others who are also involved in the conflict and experience satisfaction simply when the conflict is being addressed. When problems and conflicts arise, they'll usually note down tentative ideas for resolving the issue while keeping an open mind. They like to keep the whiteout handy so they can cross out and rewrite solutions that might appear to be better than the original thoughts on the topic. In a family with 3 perceiving types and 1 judging type, this disparity often rears its ugly head, and many battles are fought over the need for flexibility and the need for sticking to a decision that's been made. When any of us make a time or a date or something to do with Jack, our solitary J, we're prone to changing our minds. As you do. After all, who wants to be locked in? Life is all about variety. As you would expect, this causes much frustration and anger for Jack. We've found to avoid conflict over this, we've had to discuss what makes a commitment set in stone for both parties. We now have an agreement that we verbally have to say, yes, I will do this with you, to anything that Jack proposes, and it's done in front of a witness. That way, we can't get out of it. He, in turn, is not allowed to assume if we say, maybe, or I'll think about it, that we've actually said yes. You can see the to and fro. Phew, this relationship stuff is hard work, but worth it to avoid arguments. Today I'm talking to Nadine. Nadine is an ENFP. Her personality type is energetic, warm and passionate. She approaches life with a focus on possibilities and enthusiasm for new ideas, people and activities. Nadine runs her own business and is an experienced organisational effectiveness consultant, coach, facilitator and presenter. Hi Nadine, it's lovely to have you on today.
Hi, Kate. Thanks for having me.
It's a pleasure. Now, you and I have done a lot of discussion around the MBTI and how we both use it in our lives. How have you used the MBTI in your work life, and where have you seen the understanding of personality type as important when negotiating with others, and particularly when there's times of conflict between individuals?
Yes, I've certainly used it a lot in my professional life, and my preference is to use it in a proactive, preventative way. So, for example, use it when a team is first coming together rather than when there's a conflict. But it can be useful in both instances. So there are instances where I've seen that a style difference has actually created some irritation between people, where if they understood that that was just a style difference, it's not intended to be irritating, then that can help us come to a common understanding sooner.
Yes.
And I have in some cases worked on conflicts where the only thing the parties would agree to is that they would separately get their Myers-Briggs done and see what they could learn from that, and then maybe come together and discuss it. And almost every time they have been willing to discuss it, and it has been helpful, where the light's gone on to say, oh, when you were asking for that much detail, it's because you need that to think it through. It's not because you don't trust me.
Exactly. And so that's right. So can you just give us an example of, like, for the thinking type and the feeling type, what kind of solutions to conflict they differ in?
Yeah, one of my most memorable examples that's seared into my brain is working with an organization where 2 particular leaders had a history of conflict, and their leader decided to solve it by getting them to merge their departments. And this became
nasty.
It was difficult because you could just hear yelling coming from the meeting room. So I was asked to facilitate, and I went into the room, and the body language tells you a lot. Mm-hmm. So the two senior people were standing and pointing fingers at one another and raised voices, not yelling exactly, but more raised than you like in the corporate context. And the two more intermediate people were heads down taking notes, like they just were not making eye contact. And the subject under discussion was merging the two departments. If we had extra people, should they be laid off?
Right.
And one person was saying, oh, come on, we say that people are our most important asset. And the minute that gets challenged, you're ready to turf them, throw them out the door. And the other person's saying, we're not here to employ people. We're here to run a business. That's what we're here to do. And, I could immediately see that this wasn't either or, that this could be a both and, but because the situation was so elevated, it wasn't the time to propose solutions. But I said, I think I see what might be contributing to this problem. Could I do a type personality style exercise with you? And they said, no. To which my lesson was,
great.
When a group is in disagreement about something, it's not the time to float an idea. What I did on the advice of a more senior person is I took each of them out for lunch and said, would you be open to this idea? And they were. And yes, one typed as a feeling type preferences. The other typed more as thinking type preferences. And that really explained how they were filtering in information and what decisions they found were important, where the people values should come in and so on. And based on that, we actually had a productive discussion, and there was even some laughter around the different styles. And we were able to proceed on the basis of, let's figure out what the organization needs. Then let's look at what people fit where. And of course, the irony being they discovered they were missing some skill sets. They actually had to do some hiring. Now, that isn't always the outcome, but in this case, it was. And that wasn't one or two discussions. That took, a couple of meetings more, but we worked it out.
That's a fantastic example for people listening today, because it's very hard to go into a room that has that kind of body language, that kind of language happening between two people, de-escalate it, take it down, and work out where to move forward with the problem. And like you say, talking individually to people often helps see their point of view first, and then using the MBTI, understanding where they come from. And the fact that you can actually get a bit of humour out of the situation in the end, that's a really fabulous example. Thank you for sharing that. That's great. So how has the MBTI filtered into your personal life over the years?
Well, I first found it filtering into my clients' personal lives. So, for example, this gentleman in the exercise I just mentioned, he asked me about the difference between thinking and feeling types. Does it mean you don't have feelings?
Right.
And I said, no, not at all. It means that you'll use different things to make decisions where values are important. And so he went home and told his wife, this lady at work told me I have no feelings. and she said, I hope you didn't have to pay for that. I could have told you for free. So that's where I started noticing people would ask about their kids and they'd ask about their spouses. And while I was training, I was really fortunate to have willing family members, extended and close family, who volunteered their time, took the indicator, listened to the debrief, asked the questions and so on. And it turned out to be so useful. We learned so many helpful things. Like, for example, when you're planning a vacation, your introverts with introvert preferences, they just want to take a book and go to the beach. And not together necessarily, where you're more...
No, separate and quietly.
Right. Where you're more extroverted individuals, they want to plan to do this, and then we'll go dancing, and then we'll go see this site, and then we'll go see on this trip, and we'll go see manatees and whatever. So very, very helpful. And it led to a protocol in our family of each person gets to choose their favorite activity for one day, but in between, we have a day off. And people can...
That's a fabulous idea.
Oh, yeah.
Yep.
It really helped.
Absolutely. Because in our family, we struggle with that as well. The extrovert-introvert holidays are very different, and we're lucky we have two of each. So we managed to spread the load throughout the holiday. But people out there who are listening right now, you might actually think about your holidays and have a think about what actually happens when you go, and whether there's any fighting or anything around how people enjoy their break.
Yes.
It's very, very different, very different. So when you started using it with your family, looking at it, seeing how it affected other people's families, and you started using it with your actual family that you live with, what are some of the things that you learned from them?
Well, I learned that they they valued and benefited from the knowledge and did not want to be typecast. So that's an important thing to remember. These are preferences that we will see, but everybody needs a balance. So very helpful to know that. Helpful to have that self-knowledge. I mean, for me, it was especially helpful. My preferences are very extroverted. You can see that from what I do for a living, where my husband is maybe the other side of the continuum. And so I learned that, that hour between coming home from work, when we used to go to work, between coming home from work and having dinner, that's a really challenging hour, especially if you have a mix of extroverts and introverts. The people with more extroverted preferences, they want to share their day with you. And it's well meant. They want to download. They want to, get your opinion, all of those kinds of things. They want to engage you. People with more introverted preferences, if they've had a very busy day with a lot of people interruptions, they want that time to kind of collect their thoughts, take a deep breath, reflect on the day, think about what they want to do for the evening, that kind of thing. So there tends to be conflict in that hour. And I remember having that experience where I was trying to resolve a conflict that day with an audience that was challenging. And I came in, my husband was reading something on the couch, and I said, "You would not believe the day I have." And I just launched right in and told the story. Well, he was reading, I think it was a book, and he kind of moved it up a bit, which body language should say, "Hey, extrovert,
get lost,
slow down." But I was upset, so I kept going. And finally, he put his hand up and he said to me, "Well, what do you want from me? Do you want a solution or do you want me to listen?" And I was a little taken back by the question, and I stepped back and I said, "Well, I think I'd just like you to listen." And he said, "Well, sorry, I'm not up to it today. You'll have to phone a friend." So,
wow.
So of course I phoned my best friend to complain about my husband.
Of course you did.
And she said to me, "Well, considering the line of work that you're in, you should reflect on that. What's the learning?" And I was like, "Okay, great. Thank you, I think."
Yep.
And it took me a little while to kind of reflect on what she'd said, reflect on what he'd said. And I realized, oh my gosh, they're actually both right. That we have our different styles. This is what we need to do at the end of the day. And I could learn more about the introvert perspective. So I asked my husband, I said, "Okay, I've rethought that, and I really should not have gone on like that." And you gotta love him. He patiently listened, didn't say anything. And I said to him, I've actually been learning now about how hard that is, because with people with introverted preferences, they do listen, and they listen well, and it costs them energy.
Yes.
Where for people with more extroverted preferences, talking with people gives them energy.
Absolutely.
So we need to be mindful of that, right?
So what did he say to you? You're asking him, "What can I do for you?" Did you come up with any kind of solution of give me half an hour when I first come in and sit down, or talk to me if I say it's all good? What was your solution to that?
Yeah, well, what we talked about was that he had a very busy day with a lot of interruptions, and he has a very detailed technical job, and the interruptions are costly. They're costly for extroverts as well, but in this particular day, he'd had a long, exhausting day. And what we decided was our go-to was to assume that in that hour, we were all readjusting to being home. This included the kids.
Yep.
We're all readjusting to be at home. Let's just get focused on getting everybody fed so it doesn't get into a conflict.
Yes.
And then test the waters and see, who's got something interesting to share, what was a good thing that happened today, that kind of thing. And that actually ended up working out really well for us, but also for our kids, where I found one of mine with more introverted preferences often didn't like to speak about her day until it was almost time to go to bed, where the other one might be telling us about her day as she's getting off the school bus. So just learning and appreciating those differences and just working with each other on them, it just takes down so much unnecessary friction.
Oh, it does. And adapting to other people's behaviours and being willing to adapt to those is really, really important as well, because some people a lot of people that I work with will say, "But why do I have to change?" And I say, well, that's fine. You don't have to. But if you want to create a great relationship with the people that you're living with or the people that you're working with, then yes, you do. You have to put yourself in someone else's shoes, and you do have to view the world through their eyes. And so what you're saying is, therefore, your dinner time was probably the place that you exchanged conversation, which is wonderful. And the time getting home, we have the same thing. The time getting home is really just to put everything away, and dinner time is where we sit down and talk. And I think dinner time is actually a great place to do that. I mean, not saying we don't have arguments, because we do, but it's a really good spot to sit there and everyone's diffused and they're sitting down. Yeah, that's fabulous. Yep, absolutely. So when you're talking about people not being typed as well, not liking to be typed, I really understand that too. And I say to people, everyone's unique, because we all come to the table with so many different experiences, the things we've done, where we're brought up, who we are, and the culture we're in. However, it does give them an insight into the fact that people are really different. And in fact, there's so many likenesses to those differences that it really helps us in that.
I can share actually a work example for that really struck me. I was working with a group of human resource professionals, and they're very caring of people. In this particular group, all but one were feeling types. And the one thinking type, this gave an opportunity for her to say, one of the things I've noticed is whenever there's something technical or compliance related or that needs a spreadsheet, you all turn to me. And she said, well, I have feelings too, and I care about people too, and I don't want to be the only one doing this kind of technical work. And it was a great opportunity for the group, because again, all feeling types are like, oh my goodness, we hadn't realized we were doing that. We were imposing, so.
And we're really sorry, and yes, we'll fix that. I got to admit, I've had some thinking types in a group that was 25 of them versus one feeling type. And when I did say, you need to put yourself in someone else's shoes, one of them put their hand up and they said, do you mean manipulate people? And of course, we feeling types go, oh, you can't say manipulate. That's just terrible. And I thought, well, actually, in their heads, if that's what they're thinking and about, I said to them, well, yes, if you like to look at it as manipulation and getting things done the way that you need them to be done, you can, and that's okay. And they all nodded their heads. So language is really, really important with these people too, but it is important to remember that in thinking and feeling, we can all feel and we can all think, like you say, really important, really important.
We just handle it differently. And we are definitely not trying to change anyone. What we're trying to do is add understanding, awareness, and skill building so that we can communicate better and work together more effectively.
Absolutely. Now, whether you want to or not, you work a lot with people who are in fields where they need conflict resolution. So what ways do you use your personality knowledge to help settle or solve problems?
Yes. Well, having had the opportunity to observe how people make decisions, what they pay attention to, after a while, you kind of begin to form some intuition around what might this person's style preferences be. And I can see that quite early if I'm asked to help resolve a conflict. And that gives me kind of a place to start. So often what I'll do is something like that. It's fairly neutral. So we might do that one-on-one, me with each of them. And then I ask them, would you be willing to discuss this with your colleague? And most often they are. And then the next thing we will do is clear up who's supposed to be doing what. There's often, work that's fallen through the cracks or work that's gotten done twice, which is very irritating for people. And that's often that could be a different thinking style. Often I find that one has to do with sensing or intuitive. So either you're very concrete, task focused. I know what I'm doing today. I know what I'm doing tomorrow. I've made a plan. Or you're intuitive and you're thinking, gee, if I keep doing this way, what's it going to be like 2 years from now? So I listen to the way...
What changes can I make?
Yes. I listen to the way people frame their challenges, and sitting down and clarifying where each person is coming from can really help sort that out. And sometimes that's all you need in a workplace conflict. Other times, it's more involved and there's a lot more to the personalities. But I would say in almost all of the conflicts that I've worked on, we've done some element of personality styles work. And that's been something that stayed with people as being useful.
Excellent. And when you come to family situations, what kind of situation in a family might you have used the knowledge of the personality styles of your children and yourselves?
Well, vacations is a big one. And part of what I took from my training in the Myers-Briggs was that you're most like yourself when it's the weekend and you're relaxed, your shoes off self. And everybody goes into these vacations with a completely different idea of what they want from it. So, we used to visit my husband's uncle, and he would send us a detailed to-the-minute itinerary. And he was an engineer, very logical thinking type. And that would make us smile, as opposed to feeling like, he was trying to over-control our itinerary. We just knew that was his way of being helpful. So very helpful to know those kinds of things. Helpful to know just even in terms of activities. So one of the things with parenting that's so difficult is we want our kids to have all these different experiences. And that may not be at all what suits them for their personality style. And those styles show up very early.
They do.
You can see that. Yeah.
They do.
I don't know if you've ever volunteered at circle time in kindergarten, but you'll see a whole bunch of kids leaning in and smiling and clapping. You'll see a few with their little backs turned to the circle.
I know. And they don't. And the worst part about that is that people don't know about this kind of thing in those situations and spend a lot of time perhaps overwhelming the child who is the introvert, who perhaps doesn't want to be there, giving them more attention and draining them even more in that sense. This is where I go, really, everybody should have some kind of toolbox of things that we're talking about to be able to use in life for situations like that.
Completely. And then when it comes to choosing courses in high school and looking at careers,
yes.
This kind of information is so helpful. I mean, it doesn't say what your abilities are, but it does say what you'll be interested in. And pursuing what you're interested in means you're going to want to get good at it. So this is why I really want to make this information available to people, because it is so helpful. And nowadays they're saying we're going to have, I don't know what you were told in school. I was told I'd have to have several jobs in my lifetime. My kids are being told several careers in their lifetime.
Wow. That's a huge thing to think about, isn't it?
Yeah.
The other thing about knowing your personality type is understanding that if you are working in your greatest, most preferred style, you are the happiest that you are. Like, you can work in any style, but often that will put stress on you if you're working against your natural preference. So if you're stressed and you're in a job, I've actually spoken to several people who actually went and resigned because they realised that the job that they were in was causing them great stress and it didn't suit them. And when confronted with it, they realised it was much better for their mental health actually not to be in that job. And then they looked at what made them happy and what felt right for them and went into that different kind of industry.
Yeah, or even a different facet of the same industry. So I worked with one gentleman who was really unhappy in his work and was getting a lot of criticism for not being good at it. And when I did his Myers-Briggs, he was in a sales role, and his Myers-Briggs was introverted, intuitive, feeling, perceiving. So a very thoughtful, caring person, creative, more introverted. And here he was in a position that was requiring him to be out there with people all the time and always selling and what
so draining.
Yes, yeah. And what we discovered is that he knew the industry really well, and his greatest satisfaction came from helping customers understand what they were buying, and if they had an issue or a problem or a challenge, helping to resolve that. So he shifted his role to more focus on customer service, a high-end kind of customer service where he really had to research the solutions, and was so much happier in that role.
That's fantastic. And like you say, he didn't actually have to leave that job. He just moved sideways into a role that suited him better.
Yeah.
That
he
is
didn't
amazing.
have to leave that company.
No,
Yeah.
Absolutely. Aside from utilising personality knowledge, what are some negotiating skills you use in life and business that could help our listeners to handle conflict?
Yeah, negotiating and conflict are pretty close. Really what it is I want something, you want something, and if those two things don't conflict, we're okay. But what if we see it differently, or we want different pieces of the pie, those kinds of things? So I've found some of the best skills to have are to be able to listen really well to the other party, whether or not they listen to you, but to be able to listen to them really well, try to understand their perspective, and listen to understand even if you actively disagree.
Right.
And what happens when you're listening really well to someone is it's actually very calming. They know they're being heard, and you may be hearing things you didn't know about what they're needing out of this negotiation or whatever it might be. So that skill is applicable, in almost any relationship, really. Yeah.
Yes, it is. Absolutely. And the thing about that skill is it actually is really, really hard because you actually have to not talk about yourself. And so it's a great one. Absolutely great. Nadine, thank you for talking to me today. You are gold, and the listeners are going to get so much out of it and be able to apply so much of it to their lives. I really appreciate you talking to me and look forward to talking to you again soon.
Okay. Thank you so much, Kate.
So putting your own perspective to one side and authentically listen to respond to a question without putting your view across can be one of the best ways to negotiate conflict. Do you like to be heard? I do. Try it sometime. Nadine has left us with some takeaway tools and tips for negotiating conflict. Number 1, understanding personality styles. This is a great first step to aid in the understanding of one another and preventing conflict. Understanding personality styles can also help resolve a conflict. For example, being aware that the extrovert's desire to apologize and move on may not work with the introvert's desire to reflect on the situation. Understanding this helps us be more patient and kind with one another. Emotional management. Knowing myself well enough to know what upset me and prepare in advance, or knowing when I'm upset and being able to navigate the situation without losing my cool. We need emotional management first so we can exercise the other skills. Communicating, listening, and questioning. Listening to hear what is causing a problem for the other person, even, and maybe especially, if we actively disagree, and even if they're not expressing themselves well. Questioning. Asking good, non-threatening questions to learn more about the causes of the conflict and to perhaps discover some solutions. Using open questions, such as, what do you think could help? Or phrases such as, help me understand your perspective. Open questions require more than a yes-no answer, and they encourage us to think creatively. Avoid why questions, as these put people on the defensive. And avoid too many close-ended questions, especially at the beginning, as these also put people on the defensive as well. Reflection and learning. Reflection on what caused the conflict, what was learned from us and the other person, and what we can learn about ourselves helps us to resolve the next conflict more easily, and maybe even prevent future conflicts. So worth the effort. It really is. Now, finding out your personality type is tricky. There are many tests online that people use to take the MBTI that isn't a real MBTI instrument. These can be a guide, but often without working with a consultant, people can misread or misinterpret the results. It's always advised that this process is assisted in conjunction with an MBTI consultant, like Nadine and myself. We're able to consult via Zoom if you're in another country or another place. The costing and details will be available at the end of this podcast. Wherever you are in the world, you will be able to find someone in your area who is a consultant. I'm Kate Mason. Thank you for listening to Personalities, Parenting and Partners. If you enjoyed this episode, we'd love it if you'd leave a rating and a review that would help others learn about this podcast. If you have an episode idea, please send a note to thepersonalitycoach@gmail.com. Many thanks to our producers at Podcasts That Pop. Would you do us a favour and recommend this podcast to one friend? Thanks, and see you next time.